Okay. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of Monday, August 27th with the Planning Commission and the Avalon City Council. If we would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Place your hand over your heart and begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. And may we please have the roll call?
Okay, I'll do that. Commissioner Putnam?
Here.
Commissioner Morris?
Here.
Commissioner Hewart?
Here.
Commissioner Glass?
Here.
Chairman Montano?
Here.
Councilman Albers?
Here.
Councilman Olson?
Here.
Mayor Marshall?
Here.
I'm sorry, I'm going.
You're doing fine.
Councilman Hernandez?
Here.
Commissioner Patterson?
Here.
And Councilwoman Cassidy?
Here.
And Commissioner Phillips?
Here.
I'm not used to having to jump back and forth. I apologize.
Okay. Are there any announcements or written communications?
I
No?
have none.
Oral communication, this is an opportunity for people in the public to speak on items that aren't on the agenda. You will be limited to 3 minutes and no action will be taken. Okay. What?
Walking to the podium.
I know. Okay. Who's going to announce our special business and why we're here? Go ahead, Amanda.
Tonight, we are here to discuss 3 different housing ordinances. The state has adopted new statutes regarding accessory dwelling units, density bonus units, and inclusionary housing. And many of these new statutes make our municipal code obsolete or non-compliant, I guess is a diplomatic way of saying it. And so we're going to go through those 3 issues as the state has directed that they be handled. Accessory dwelling unit is a new one for us. We don't currently have an accessory dwelling unit ordinance. So we're going to try to keep it fairly high level this evening, talk about some of the things that the state will allow us to do and not do in our ordinance, and hopefully get some direction from you on those areas where we can make a choice so that we can bring something back to you a little more refined. Elizabeth Hull is here from BB&K, and she has a presentation for us, and so I think we'll probably just jump right in. And I know some of you are on a short schedule this evening, so we'll try to get as far as we can before any of you have to leave us. Elizabeth?
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Hull, and I'm an attorney with Best Best & Krager. I handle the firm's redevelopment, economic development, and affordable housing practice group. So I've been working with your council for a number of years on these issues, and like Amanda said, we've had a number of changes in law in the past few years. So ideally, we're going to get through all 3 of these. They're very sort of big and complicated topics. So I apologize for the wealth of information that I threw at you in the staff reports and draft ordinances, and we'll just go as far as we can, and if we need to reconvene, we'll reconvene. But there's a lot of information here. So I'm going to start with, oh, look at that, accessory dwelling units. So I don't know, it's item 3 in your staff report. We're going to go a little out of order. Accessory dwelling units are known by a number of names, for those of you who aren't familiar with them. Most commonly, granny flats, second dwelling units, anything along those lines where you add an extra unit to an existing piece of property or build a separate unit as you're building a main residence. Ideally, they are more affordable to construct. They give you the opportunity to either rent out the unit or house family members for less expense on the property. They create sort of shared but independent living. They are favored by the state at this point. That's really tiny. I'm going to have to go down there so I can see. I apologize.
Way too small. We're going to have to either make it so our screens can enlarge these things, because Most of the presentations we're getting, we can't even see them.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't realize it would come out this small.
But you're not the only one.
Like, I can't read that. So there's a new state ordinance that came into effect at the end of last year that requires us to deal with accessory dwelling units. The state law has some prescriptive parts, and then it has some areas where we can personalize it to Avalon. So the table that you have in your staff report sort of goes through, in the first column, it's what the city has to do, what's required by state law, what's in the has to be in the ordinance, or we have to just take on from state law. In the third column there, so you've got the category, then what the city must do. The third column are the few areas where we have discretion. You have in your packet a sample ordinance. That's just a template that we've used in other jurisdictions and that we put together for Avalon last year. So it's up to you. I can go through each one of these. If you've already reviewed it and you want to just talk about it, we can do that. I want to use your time as efficiently as possible. Mayor Marshall, do you have a preference?
No, but I just have a question already.
Okay.
But it has the discretion to, and then when it says, just explain that. So if there's not enough water or whatever, or sewer service, we can deny. That's what that says?
Right, so if you look at the second one on the table where it says the category's location, the city must allow ADUs in at least some areas zoned for single-family or multifamily residence, but you have the discretion to restrict the ADU areas based on supported findings about the inadequacy of water and sewer services. So you have to allow it somewhere, but you don't have to allow it everywhere. And you can consider things like adequacy of the sewer service into that area as to whether or not you're going to allow ADUs.
I think the way they're describing the services here is if someone was wanting to build an ADU in a subdivision and the subdivision's sewer lateral would not have a capacity for expansion. I believe because we are under stage water rationing, no matter where we allowed them, it would still be subject to fresh water being available from Edison.
Correct.
Okay.
So these are infrastructure issues versus actual availability of water, if that makes sense.
Right.
So that is one location is one area where you have discretion. Another area is lot development. So the statute requires us to allow ADUs to be detached, or located within, as it's converted from the existing living area of the primary residence. But we do have the ability to restrict ADUs to just one per lot. So like I said, I can continue to go through this. Really what we're looking for is some direction from the Planning Commission and Council on how you feel about each of these issues. Do you want us to limit it? Do you want us to just go with the state ordinance and not have it personalized to Avalon in any way?
So I have a question. So currently under the ordinance, ADUs are limited to parcels that have only a single-family residence. If it's a duplex or a multiplex, you can't add an ADU. But if you have a single-family residence, you could add 2 ADUs or 3 under the state law.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless we want to restrict it.
Unless the city wants to restrict.
Correct.
No, so you're saying again that if it's a multi-unit, they cannot have an ADU.
That is correct under the current state law. The property currently has to only contain a single-family residence.
It has to be in a zone that allows multifamily or single-family residence, but it can only have a single-family residence on it.
Currently on the parcel. So I think in light of our housing issue, it's for you guys to tell us, do you want to restrict it to just one per parcel? Or if it's possible to add more than one and still meet all of the other restrictions, would you like to have that door open or closed?
Open. I'd like you to open the door.
On that one I would. Yeah. That part I would.
Okay, so we would not want to restrict it to just one per unit.
Okay.
Right.
Yay, our first decision. Nice.
And they're, like you say, but there's just a size requirement that it be so many square feet minimally
There's a
or
size,
something.
and then as you get in here,
A little
there's,
bit more.
you can impose some setback restrictions for fire safety, height
Okay.
restrictions, so there's still some limit on the size and the shape of the box.
Okay. Let's go down to parking. That's a good one.
Well, how about we do an easy one? Do we want ADUs to be used for transient use?
No.
Okay.
And what about it has to be owner occupant?
I would, that's,
I mean, so if I build one, but I don't want my mom to live in it and I want Micah to live there, I couldn't do that.
Yes, you can.
But this says restrict occupancy.
that you
We
have
don't
the
want to.
option.
You have the
We don't
option.
want to
Wanted it to be owner occupied.
But it also says the city must allow it to be rented.
Correct.
then-
But it's, I think some cities, they want it to only be owner occupied and it not have,
But the city must allow it to be rented, but has the discretion to restrict occupancy. That's what it said. There's two conflicting things here.
No, it can be rented, but it can't be rented short-term. Not a vacation.
And when you say
yeah, we
restrict
can restrict it
occupancy,
so that it's not transient occupied.
and
we have
restricting
to-
occupancy, does that mean the number of people that are in the unit? Is that
No,
what that's
that
referring
means you
to?
can't make a vacation rental out of it.
Oh, okay.
Amanda, you're saying you could build two on a single-family resident lot, because we're not coming up with a number, and that basically, you don't, it doesn't have to be a mother-in-law's unit, you can rent it out, as a year-round rental.
Correct, unless you want it to be restricted to owner occupied. That's an option. Some cities have chosen that.
Okay.
No.
And it wouldn't seem to make any sense for
For
us.
us, no, not at all.
So we've thrown out Florida lot and lot coverage.
Or is that further down there?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Councilman.
We're throwing out Florida lot and lot coverage.
You're throwing out
You can set, it says you can set lot coverage standards for ADUs.
So there
My
have to be-
recommendation that it would just be whatever that zone currently allows.
So in essence, on the flats, we're not adding any ADUs.
Let's put it on
Well,
the roof.
yeah, unless you put it on the second story.
Then it's a duplex.
Right, but it starts out as a single-family residence. That's the important part. Right.
So-
So, do we get a consensus on whether we want to restrict it to owner occupancy?
We don't want to restrict
We
it.
don't
Don't
want
want
to do that. Okay.
So
I'm sorry.
The next issue would be parking.
Okay.
So
What about the ability, did we skip over parking? There was one also about, we have the choice of restricting the sale of the ADU separate from the primary dwelling. I don't know, I think
did I
that's,
miss one?
I believe we should prohibit the sale, separate from the primary dwelling.
Have to go hand in hand.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, parking.
So for parking, the city has to, if the ADU meets these criteria, so it's within a half mile of a public transit, it's in an architecturally historical significant district, those sorts of things, then you can't require parking. Beyond that, you can require up to one parking space per ADU or per ADU bedroom, except where the parking requirements are prohibited.
Well, anything on the flats is within 1/2 mile of public transit.
I think almost anything in
I-
the development part of town it is.
Again, this
If you
is,
require
except for up
parking,
the
you're
ga-
not gonna get any of them, because there's no place to put it.
Right.
You know, on your own lot in the flats, right?
Right,
There'd be no place to put it, so if you required the parking, you'd have it zero.
Yeah.
I think for purposes, I agree. I think we would have difficulty, you can't,
Nothing in
one,
the
if you're
flat.
subdividing an existing house, there's probably not an opportunity to provide parking. I would like to see us, if they have parking, then allow them to have tandem parking, which is the next one.
Oh, if they have
If they have off-street parking,
Sure.
allow them to have tandem. Some cities don't allow them to do that because I guess you're shuffling people around, but.
But then do we want to allow for vehicle stickers for ADUs?
Well, that's a question, good question for Elizabeth. So since we can restrict where vehicles are registered, and the state statute doesn't talk about that because we're the odd duck in that world, could we restrict the ADU from being able to register a golf cart. In other words, they don't get a vehicle, so parking becomes a non-issue.
Is that something we can restrict? Because I
If-
think parking isn't.
I think the question is, can we?
And actually, it's mentioned in number 4, I noticed that, for the parking requirements.
Right. That's where I was going.
What does that mean?
When on-street parking permit is required but not offered to the occupant of the EDU. So if on-street parking, when there's an on-street parking permit requirement, but you're not offering it to the ADU, so if you build an ADU but you say you can't get the permit, then you can't require parking. You just have to, it's just a spot without parking.
Okay, so like something where we're eventually going to be talking about possibly on Sumner, where the people who live on Sumner are going to get a special permit that allows them to park on the street in the 1 hour zone or whatever. If we're not offering that to the ADU occupant, we can't require them to have off-street parking. We have to offer them the same deal.
So we just take off that we're not going to require.
So is the consensus that we're not going to require additional parking for the ADU?
We might even deny it if they want one. Unless they have
That's a whole
off-street
different
parking.
issue.
But couldn't we define unit for purposes of the vehicle permitting ordinance to not include an accessory unit? I mean, the question is, do we think it's fair to set up 2 classes of people, one who are going to have a vehicle or not? But if we're carving out this additional density and we're recognizing that there's a parking issue to begin with, short of being able to have off-street parking through tandem, maybe it makes sense to just say, sorry, because most of these I would think are going to be in the flats. I don't know if that's the case, but.
And we have public transit.
Right.
I agree with Pam.
I think if you do it a different way, people just add them to get another cart.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a very good point.
Is such
In a
that,
mother-in-law's unit, now I have 2 carts.
yeah.
Well, and I think that works for us administratively because we administer our vehicles allocation based on the number of units that they are being assessed. The accessory dwelling units, I don't think qualify as additional dwelling units for purposes of assessments. That's my understanding.
Well, that would make sense to me if it was carved out from existing space, because you're not really adding a burden on
Right.
the infrastructure. But, I mean, there are instances in which you could have enough property and build an accessory unit separate from an existing house.
And that language may allow for that, where if it's within the existing structure, you can't assess it separately. Okay, I
Yeah.
retract my statement.
Okay.
So we would have to list them separately.
We have pretty much leeway with our vehicle ordinance.
So
You know, 'cause
Auto
this is kind of the
registration
issue we
would
ran
not
into
ap-
with the Hermosa, right?
right.
What do
So
we do if we're letting people live year-round? Is it suddenly become a unit for the vehicle code?
right. So is the consensus that accessory dwelling units would not qualify as dwelling units for purposes of vehicle registration?
Yes.
Is that the consensus? Okay. I think that was a good point, extra dwelling unit just for the vehicle. And we're okay with tandem if it's available?
Yes.
Well, it's not going to be an issue then.
Oh, yeah, I don't think so.
Well,
That was the next
change
one.
it. It's not, accessory dwelling units will not be viable for an on-street parking permit. So if you can have off-street parking, off-street parking, there's not an impact.
Okay, so we would treat them the way we treat vehicles of people who are not residents, people who have vacation rentals.
Right, you have to park it off-street.
They have to park
Be
off-street.
off-street parking.
Okay.
But
Okay.
if you have off-street parking, you're saying now that you can get an additional vehicle? Because that's going to add to everything as well.
As long as it doesn't add to residential parking.
Because
I would say
I-
just leave it and keep it clean. And that
Because
ADUs are
if you do, I
not.
put it in and I still put my other vehicle on my property and now I got my other vehicle anyhow. I mean, I'm just looking at how.
I don't think we need a loophole. Yeah. I think just cut and dry. No vehicles.
Okay.
So no tandem parking.
No, they can do
Tandem
tandem parking, but,
But
well,
it-
actually, that'll be a
It'd
moot
be
point,
moot
because they won't
because-
get a vehicle anyway. Okay.
Right.
So no tandem. Okay.
No car.
So do you want to set height restrictions that are specific to the ADUs? Or do you want to just go with your general height restrictions?
I would say stay with what the
yeah,
zone,
yeah.
the development standards already.
If you go larger, you would apply for a variance, and it would go through the commission for that. I would say leave
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
So we're not proposing a special allowance for ADUs.
Correct.
But what would, okay, give me an example of why it would need to be.
You have a single-story structure, you want to add a second story and make it an ADU? Are you going to allow them to go above the normal height limit in order to get that ADU in there? And I think our answer is no, the normal height restrictions for that property will apply. No special deals for the ADUs.
Okay.
We all good on that one?
Yeah.
All right. Setbacks. So you have to allow the garage to ADU conversion without imposing setbacks on the former garage. However, you can require setbacks up to 5 feet for an ADU that is built above an existing garage. You can require setback minimums for detached or attached ADUs. And then there's a little note of caution in here. Although a city may require setbacks for ADUs, setback standards may conflict with other parts of the statute. So depending on whatever guidance you give me today, we'll go back and compare that to the rest of the statute and make sure that we're not creating an inconsistency somewhere. And when we bring it back to you for actual consideration, we'll clarify that if there is an issue. But I just need general guidance on setbacks.
Oh, you do? Okay, only have one.
So,
There's 4
Elizabeth-
garages in the whole town.
Could we just impose the setbacks that normally apply to that zone?
Yes.
Because those are already at
we
minimum
have,
anyway
That's
for
what would make
purposes.
So close together anyways.
And they're already at minimum for fire safety purposes.
Oh, okay.
So the normal setbacks for that zone is what would,
3.
the ADUs don't get any kind of special deal. Is that a better way to do
So
it?
can we require that if somebody takes an existing garage, that they have to provide another off-site or on-site parking
Parking.
space if they're displacing a vehicle that was in the garage?
Why not? Makes sense.
Yeah.
If they want to use that as a
But if you
living
took the
space.
garage, then you'd have to replace your.
No, but the genesis of this was a lot of people were taking garages and converting them into units.
Or storage.
Right, yeah, or storage spaces, or,
You have to allow the garage to be converted.
right, you have to allow it to be converted. Can you condition it?
I don't believe so, but I can go back and check. And if there is an option to do that, I can alert you when we bring back a real ordinance.
Yeah.
I don't recall. You have to remember, this is drafted for, the law is drafted for the whole state, and
Right.
so Avalon's kind of a unique
They don't care
character among
Do we have enough
land use
garages
issues.
that that's going to be?
An issue, well,
Could we require garage
And I've got off-street
conversions have to provide a space, a parking space?
that's what Elizabeth said she would.
For their
She's gonna- She
existing
doesn't think
vehicle.
so, but she would look.
For their
Okay.
existing vehicle.
Yeah.
Right. For the-
And I would assume
For
it's
the
one
vehicle that's going to be
parking space.
displaced in the parking.
Is it one parking per, or one vehicle per household?
It's one,
Yes.
it's one parking
Dwelling
space per dwelling unit. Autoettes are licensed dwelling units.
Okay.
Full-size vehicles are licensed to people.
Okay.
So we're primarily, though, I think, trying to look at autoet and parking.
Okay. I don't believe so, but I'll confirm. All right. Lot coverage. So the state law is silent on it. So do you want to set lot coverage standards for ADUs? We have to make sure, again, it's sort of like the last one, that it doesn't conflict with other requirements. So whatever you decide, we'll go back and look at that. But do you want to set specific ones for an ADU? Do you want to just use your general lot coverage standards?
If
Where are
we
we on it?
impose our normal development standards for lot coverage, and they are creating a attached or detached, something not within the footprint of the existing structure, they can still apply for a variance for the lot coverage, correct?
Apply for a variance. Yes.
Don't hold me
Yes,
to it.
because it's not addressed in the statute.
So we could impose our normal lot coverage development standards that currently apply, and if they want to put something in there and it's going to exceed the lot coverage, they could go through the normal variance.
And that costs them a lot of money?
About $1,000, $1,500.
Okay, so let's try to back off from that. If we're wanting these units, we don't want to deter them because of that, do we? Or-
No, if they want a variance, they would have to go back through the planning commission and apply for that.
I know, but is there something we can put in the language so that they wouldn't have to do that, I guess is the question.
You could,
And change the fee.
What's the fee?
it's about $1,500 for a variance.
Or do you
Between the
change the lot
public
coverage
notice and everything.
standards?
But I
It's
assume,
not a huge deal.
but that fee is
could-
cost
I mean, if you're
recoverable,
building
right?
another
So
building,
it's a cost
$1,500
recoverable-based
But
fee.
the variance-
So
that-
processing a variance,
It's
I mean,
kinda
that's
not
our
the
normal
purpose of
variance fee.
either. I mean,
Right.
it's find hardship so you
Right.
can do what your neighbors
Yeah.
did. This is something new in theory. So,
Try to avoid doing variances, right?
Find the hardship.
yeah, if we
Minimize
want
the
to allow
variances.
a little more
Yeah.
building on a lot, then we should just allow it and not make them go through a hoop that wasn't, you know.
Right, if we're
that was
wanting an
supposed to treat
ADU,
people
why would
fairly
we?
for like projects.
right. And remember, you're going to hear me say a lot today as it relates to all of these ordinances. The idea of the state is to facilitate these developments, to
Right.
make it easier. So adding variance requirements and things like that are sort of inconsistent with what the state's goal.
Right.
And depending on how burdensome we make it, can set you up for challenge. Because the idea is to facilitate development, not make it more challenging.
So how do we set lot coverage standards? Planning commission looks at numbers?
How does this sound? It's our standard lot coverage amount,
Right.
and they can exceed it if it's an ADU, as long as they're still meeting the setbacks for fire safety purposes.
How are they going to meet the setbacks? I mean, just.
Well, I
when
mean, you
look-
still need a 3-foot setback, but your lot coverage could be,
Still going to be 80%.
If you go outside of you go outside of the footing, you're not gonna have your setbacks, right?
I mean, there are a few houses that have little yards. If they wanted to put a 300 square foot,
Blanche Belkey's place,
right,
or the house on Clarissa that.
right, that's exactly the one I was thinking of, yeah.
You could put a lot on that. Okay, you got a couple more?
so do we want to just leave it with our, whatever our standard lot coverage is?
Like give it 20%.
That's what I was thinking, if you wanted to allow 15, 20, 30% over
Yeah.
the normal zoning for
No, I
ADUs.
don't think we want to increase density that much. I mean, you look at the flats, there are a few that people could work it in there, and it wouldn't be exceeding lot coverage.
That's not really increasing density. Units per lot would be density. This is just the size of the unit. So it would allow.
Well, a separate
Those
accessory
two
unit would
units.
enable more people to live on. I mean, I think
Right,
isn't
allow
that
more.
what
Yeah,
you're
that's-
using
yeah.
density in
Yeah,
that sense?
that's good.
Yeah.
But that can fluctuate without changing. More or less people can live in the same house.
Right.
I know, 20%, it just shows that we want to provide an incentive,
Mm-hmm.
I think. I don't know if it will ever be used.
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think it'd be,
So we'll allow 20% over the normal development.
well, I'm just one person. I don't let other people speak up.
I don't know the difference what 15 or 20% means, so you guys can pick the number.
20% would be 100% lot coverage.
Yeah, for some, that's true, for some, because what are the percentages for high density?
80.
80?
I think it's 80. Used to be 80. Is it 80?
I
density?
didn't bring my municipal code with me.
I think it's, I'm pretty sure
You
it's 80.
could do 20%
So you're saying
provided that.
20% of 80?
20 If you go 20% over the 80,
Oh, okay, I thought you meant 20% of the 80.
So you could provide 20% up to a 95% lot coverage, so you maintain a 5% buffer.
So
or
go
something like
15,
that.
is that what you just said?
No,
20%, but
Up
if
to-
it's someplace that already has an 80% coverage, then they would be limited to 15.
so 95%.
So you end up
is-
with
95% is the number.
95%, yeah.
Okay. 95%.
so they can exceed the normal development standard lot coverage up to 95%.
But I bet in some of these places, by the time you figure out what the setbacks are, that,
Ain't gonna do it.
yeah, it's not gonna, I don't know.
So you-
Okay, well,
We'll try it.
sometimes you just try it and you wait to see if anybody comes forward and
See what the issue could
fit
be.
into it.
And part of this will be hit and miss, and as we go to implement it, we'll find issues and, we'll have to readjust. But this will at least give you a basis, and we'll get something on the books.
This next one's funny.
What's what?
The
Landscape.
Do we want to require, restrict?
You have to put a potted plant out
Do you
front.
want landscaping? It doesn't, I'm not sure we have room for
Wrong with it.
landscaping because we've just gone to 95% lot coverage.
So just taking away all the dirt left, yeah.
I think there's no
I don't
restrictions.
think we can restrict anything there.
Okay. Any sort of architectural review or architectural restrictions?
We don't have that now.
Right.
All right.
Well, really? We don't want to put anything like that on anything? Even if it's a historic house and they want to put a block on it or something?
That's the next.
Oh, I
Historic
see
is
that, but
next.
I thought we were kind of
Okay.
sliding over that, so,
Nope, historic is the next one on the list.
okay.
So do we want to impose standards to avoid impacts to historic structures?
Yes.
So what type of impacts are you wanting to avoid?
Wouldn't we have to, I mean, do you have a list of the historical?
The structures in town that are in the general plan? You can kind of rattle them off.
Yeah.
Tuna Club, Holly Hill House, Mount Ada.
Spots, or are these
Yeah,
just
like-
old houses that we would consider
Exactly, how do
historic?
we determine that? Doesn't have to be on record somewhere?
Yes.
No, but the general plan designates certain
We have a
properties.
list that
There
are
should be a list now,
listed as historically significant to Avalon, and they're the ones that you typically recognize. A home that's on the flats built in 1910, it's probably not on that list. So,
So then how do we, if we put that in here, how do we?
The only ones that are on that list?
Well, that's,
When they apply, staff does the review and.
well, I think that's, go ahead, Eric, I'm sorry.
I've got a question. If we had a historic ordinance, could we just say it applies to this? I'm thinking kind of through the back door, since
Do we have one?
one of the issues came up, no.
No,
really
but
don't
we
have
want
anything,
one.
So it'd be kind of awkward to create one for this.
No, but there are
But it might
properties
be-
that are designated in the general
Right.
plan.
Right, so we probably.
So why wouldn't we
should do
just
something-
reference those?
Because like,
Except we don't have a standard, I think is the problem.
No, but the general plan, based on an environmental review, there was somebody who did a historical study and said these properties constitute historical properties for purposes of your general plan. We never did anything more with that, but we could certainly do something for accessory units and say, we don't want you building an accessory unit in front of a historical property. Or on top of it, or, I mean,
Well, I think-
the list is not that long, but it makes sense to me that we wouldn't want those.
What if you just had
When they're
architectural
talking,
review of it?
well, the ordinance is talking about subdividing an existing structure. So the impact to that historic property would be the subdivision of that property.
But not
of that
always.
historic property.
Not necessarily.
But I mean, that's what this ordinance is about, is subdividing an existing single-family residence, or adding on to
Or adding
it.
on.
Or adding on to it.
So I think,
Or building in front of it if you have enough space. It's not just a carve out.
Do we have
But why
any historic
should you-
single-family homes? I don't know.
Right, but
Yes,
let's
yes,
say
we
that
do.
there is a historic home in town that has the ability to build an accessory unit in front of it. Why should their right be taken away to build that accessory unit because somebody in the city determines that that should be on the historical list? Like, that's what I struggle with, is you're taking away a homeowner's right.
That's
That may
the
not
whole
wanna
basis
be-
of planning and zoning is limiting people's ability to do what they can do with their property for the greater good.
I don't think it's
So,
about
You know,
limiting.
whether it's how many vehicles you allow people, or how many bedrooms they can have, or anything else. It's that there's some general plan that
I can see
oversees.
it
So,
with number of
and you,
units, setbacks, all of that, but I don't see it with the term of historic. That's the one that I struggle with.
Well, then maybe we should back it up to architectural review and say, if you have a stucco home, you can't put a home with, siding next to it that's yellow. It has to somehow be, it has to fit the what is there at this time. That it can't be a rash departure from whatever is existing on that lot. I agree with you, Cindy, but I also say, if you took one of those places and you plopped something completely different in front of it, I think it's not a visual of any visual value to the town. I know that seems, but I think it's a problem here
So
already.
you're just talking with the historical, right? Or-
Well, I don't know if we can't come to something on historical, because we don't really have anything outside of the fact that we've designated them as, but not, we don't have anything in place at this time that says this is how you can restore or renovate a historic home. But if we want to go back to the one before and talk about, it has to be architecturally compatible. Thank you. I don't know. I
To
can.
like the neighboring unit?
No, to the unit that's, if it's not if it's not a junior ADU, if it's not within that unit, if it's an inclusionary unit that is detached, and they just put up something completely whack, that it doesn't go with the other rest of the house at all, I think that is to the detriment of the greater good.
So for historic structures, we could require that any attached or detached ADU has to carry the same architectural style, period,
As the existing
type as the existing structure.
But you guys, does it have to be historic? Couldn't it be anything? I mean, couldn't it be on any place couldn't we have something that just says, that's what I'm saying, go back up to the next one and say, anything has to be architecturally compatible, that you're going to add not an ADU, because that's within the house, junior ADU, but a big, a whole separate structure.
But then you're forming an architectural committee for everything that happens to say that you agree with the way, I want you to build your house the way I like it. That doesn't make any sense.
No,
Well,
but
no.
it compatible with the existing structure. No, that's not, it's okay if we put up a geodesic dome next to a mid-century modern on that property? I mean, I'm just saying with some kind of framework, what could potentially happen? Because I think that's what this is all about, is looking at seeing so somebody could put a yurt,
That was going to be my example.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. So is that what we want to see happening? I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe it isn't about historical, because we really don't have any clout for that. But if we put it back to the one before that says,
The problem,
go.
I think the problem with that is, all those ideas are really good, except that it looks like we're picking on something we're trying to promote. So even though all those things make sense, this doesn't seem like the right avenue to do it.
So I have a
Because-
question, I'm sorry.
Anyway.
I have a question for Elizabeth. So if the city were to eventually form an architectural review board committee standards, is there anything in here that would preclude ADUs from being subject to that same review and standard? Because the state is silent on it.
Right.
So we could say that
could add a
ADUs would
requirement
also be, that should the
that says-
city establish an architectural review board for all development, not just ADUs, that ADUs would also be
Right.
subject.
Any future ADU would be
When it comes
reviewed.
to historic property, it seems like that it helps us to impose on a historic property that the ADU needs to be of the same period, style, and type as the historic structure. And that is a pretty short list of structures that fit that. Even the Holly Hill House has 2 units in it, so it wouldn't be eligible for an ADU. So I don't know if that's something that would be palatable to the group.
Yes.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So for historic, it must
Match the period.
it must be in keeping with the same period and construction style as the existing historic structure. And for architectural review, should the city ever form an architectural review board, the ADUs would.
But I think some of us in this room are sensitive to what Paul is talking about. And I don't know, I think at a minimum, there should be something about the gist of what we would like. I mean, yes, you don't want a yurt in front of my place if I had the room, but if I have a log cabin in the back and now I want a geodesic dome, do we want to do that? So I think, well, number one, we don't have any, so is that in the realm of what Avalon wants? Who knows? But, so I don't know if you could just say, in the,
Well, I think that Amanda's language kind of got at that.
Yeah, okay, you
That
think-
if we,
well
if we
enough?
form an architectural review board, it would
No, she
apply
says
to
if we
everyone.
do, if we do, but
Right,
until
but I
we
think,
don't.
I think if you go back to Eric's point, that we want to try not to impose restrictions on an ADU that's not, doesn't
Yeah.
apply to everything else, because we want to be an incentive
Sure.
ordinance, not a
If
disincentive.
that's something we want to do, we need to form an architectural review board
Right.
to make it across the board.
And if the directive from the council is you want the planning commission to discuss possibly going in the direction of an architectural review board, then you can give that directive to the planning commission and we'll put it on an agenda.
Just FYI, I asked if we could put it on the agenda for next planning commission meeting. I don't know, to just start the conversation.
It's okay with me if you start the conversation.
Right,
Learn
and
about
I
the
don't know where it'll
council.
go. It may not go, it might go right in the wastebasket, but it,
It's a
On our
tough
condo
one.
association, I sit on an architectural review committee. It's a nightmare.
It
I'm
is.
telling you how and what you can build on your property according to how I feel it should look. And you can get sued for it. There's all kinds of things that can come up from it because it's like,
okay, so, but
We're
that
turning it
isn't,
into
that
a
isn't
giant
our discussion
condo.
today, but the one thing I would say about that is that many, many cities manage to do it, and it keeps a cohesive look to the town as opposed to, so, but that's not today's discussion, so I don't want to, you know.
There's also, though, just going to slip in the cultural part of maintaining that it's not, because like they say, a lot of times the only people that can really do that are the people that have a lot of money, like the people who redid the Holly Hill house,
kept with the period perfect.
What's that?
They kept with the period perfect.
Exactly. And,
Except for the lights.
and then, but then you also have the cultural part of town that you don't want to lose either. And it's not necessarily something that's really beautiful.
And it
For
doesn't all
example,
match each other.
Las Casitas.
Right.
Maintaining a little bit of Las Casitas or Old Tremont or something in development, because that's a cultural history that shouldn't be lost, whether those be mini museums or whatever. So if you all want to tackle it, you go right ahead.
All right, I think that's ADUs.
That's ADUs.
So
I
then,
think
That wasn't so bad.
that was the easy one, but we're not quite done, because there's still one more option. So you could adopt a separate ordinance to address junior ADUs. Now, a junior ADU is a unit that is not more than 500 square feet in size and is contained entirely within the existing single-family dwelling structure. So if you were to adopt a junior ADU ordinance, it could include certain things, and they're listed here. So you can only have one junior ADU on a residential lot. The lot's got to be zoned for a single family. There must already be an existing single-family residence on the lot. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that go with that. Do we even want to consider a junior ADU ordinance? Do we not want to talk about it? You want to just get the big one on the books and we'll go from there?
I couldn't understand the advantage of having it.
It's really designed for, if you think of like Arcadia, where they have these really big lots, and they want to be able to regulate more specifically what happens inside the single-family residence versus adding a separate unit. I'm not sure it's applicable to Avalon. I think we can cover all of your needs in one ordinance, but you all are the policymakers, so I'm just presenting it as an option for you.
Like simpler would be better.
Well, what about tiny houses? That could be 250 to 300 square feet in size.
Inside the existing
But I think
So-
we're already covered with that.
So
I mean, this is
You can
almost
still
another
do that.
layer of the same thing, and it just,
Oh, see, I didn't know what size those other ones were to know that this 500 square feet might seem big.
So junior ADUs are entirely within the existing structure, and then you can have separate rules for those.
Or within the existing.
So,
I'm not sure you need them.
and I could see that, like, that you have a house and your kids, you raise your kids and your kids all go away and all of a sudden the two of you are looking at each other with this big house saying, so it's just creating it, and it says that the people have to live in the home, that in the existing home, those people have to remain, and then you just have taken one piece of your home and created a small unit.
Right.
Which I think, if that's the goal of this whole thing,
but can't you do that already with the other?
I don't know.
You can do that under
You can
the
do that
the
under the
general
regular
agreement.
All right, well then, that's, okay.
This just imposes additional requirements for the junior version.
Okay.
Okay.
All right? So we had enough of ADUs? All right.
Okay.
All right, so let's go back. So, for ADUs.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had one more point. So, we have so many non-conforming properties. Are we going to have a provision that says non-conforming properties don't lose their non-conforming protection by doing this?
Oh, like if somebody's
Like
legally
somebody's got
non-conforming.
setbacks, or, you know,
Right.
there's a rule that says there, if you change this, I was just looking through Rolling Hills, and
For
they have
legal-
that.
For legal non-conforming structures, under our code, if you touch it, you
Right.
lose your legal non-conforming status.
Right. So I think we need to
and I don't think
designate that we're
The
not.
state doesn't
I don't think the
address
state
that,
addresses
but-
it.
But
we
we
can.
could add that
Yeah.
it doesn't,
If that's your desire.
it doesn't trigger that.
We can add a
Right.
provision that complying with, adding an ADU in compliance with this does not
Change
trigger
your-
your non-conforming
Right.
status.
Okay. That's a good catch.
Or, you like that one?
Yeah.
The non-conforming lot is non-conforming because of setbacks. We're not going to let it increase the amount of setbacks it has with the new development.
Right, the language should say you can't increase the nonconformity.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Why, we can't take it to 95%?
Oh, you just. Are we going to do bonus density or inclusionary?
Councilmember Albers, did you say there was language in a particular ordinance that you'd seen that you liked, that you want me to look at?
Yeah, Rolling Hills, I'll make a copy of it. And
Sorry. All right.
Next up.
So, for ADUs, just so we're all on the same page, we are going to prepare an actual Avalon-specific ADU ordinance. I'm going to utilize the direction that you've given Amanda and I today, and then that'll come back through your regular process. So it'll go back to the Planning Commission, they'll get a shot at it, we'll look at CEQA for it, you know, we'll go through the whole regular process. So it's going to work its way through over the next few months. Everybody good?
Yep.
All right. Next. Density bonus. But I think you can go back and sit down now. I don't have any more small charts that I will be able to read. Okay. So, density bonus. Okay. Our next topic. So density bonus is when somebody comes in to develop a piece of property, and we have an ordinance that says if you're going to build currently in Avalon, it's 5 or more units, you are required to, or you can. I'm confusing my.
No, that's
You're getting your
inclusionary.
I'm getting my inclusionary and my density bonus. Let me start over. Density bonus says if you meet certain criteria, you can get additional units. So your lot may only allow you to build 5 units. But if you meet certain criteria, you can build some percentage more, depending on the ordinance that we adopt. If they come in and they say, I want to build 5 units and I'm going to, make 3 of them affordable, they are entitled to certain incentives or concessions. So we have options. Currently, we have an ordinance on the books, and I put it in your staff report. It's completely out of date. It has nothing to do with the current state of the law. So at a minimum, we need to repeal that. We need to get that one off the books because it's totally inconsistent. And then you have 2 choices. We can, again, adopt an Avalon-specific ordinance, or you can fall back and just rely on the state ordinance. Right now, because the law changed earlier this year and we didn't adopt a new ordinance, if we were to get a density bonus application, and I don't think we have any.
Yes, we have one.
Oh, we have one,
Farmington the other
I'm
day.
corrected. We would be applying the current state law, not your ordinance, because it's inconsistent. So right now, you are basically relying on state law. So, you have in your packet a draft density bonus ordinance. And it provides, all right. It gives you some options, and this was really just a starting point for discussion because we hadn't really had a conversation with either the Planning Commission or the council. So I just put some stuff together. Like it, don't like it, it doesn't really matter. It was really just to facilitate conversation. So the first area that we can look at are the eligibility criteria. So the ordinance that I prepared for you sets out certain criteria. In order to receive the advantages of the density bonus law, you have to meet certain eligibility criteria. And so the ordinance includes a table that identifies the percentage of BMR, which is below market rate housing. So if you're proposing to do a certain amount, then you qualify for a density bonus. And these are set out in the state law. And then it also establishes the number of incentives that the project would receive, again, based upon the qualifying units. So, do you want to talk about each one? Did you guys look at it?
So does our current code says 5?
So you're,
Right now?
No, in our current code, you can have 50% over density or 1 unit, whichever is greater, as a density bonus unit. Our current code says affordability is required for 15 years, and you need a deed restriction. And it does not have to be affordable housing, it can be market rate.
Right.
None of that is the same under the state code.
15 years, is that what we talked about?
15 went to 55.
55.
It has to be affordable housing at some level. And the percentage density over how many units you can have is a sliding scale depending on various criteria.
So this is the one that we had, they took off the floor at the last planning commission meeting.
Yes.
Because
They have.
no one's going to agree to 55 years.
They were a little
That was-
taken aback.
They just shot themselves in the foot.
So they've got to decide what they want to do with that.
That's your lifetime, so I just don't see it happening. You get devalue your property.
Well, I mean, that's what they have at Tremont. I think that was
No,
55.
it was originally
Or 30, and now that's 55.
But you see what I'm saying? If I want to put this on my property and say it's only for 15 years, that's great. 15 years, I make sure everyone's got some housing, but after that, the deed restriction goes away. 55 years, I've just sold that to the next buyer and the next buyer, and that's going to be tough for someone to swallow. I think, I just don't think people will come and do it.
It's,
Because of
that is,
On those big projects, though, like when we were with Saffron and all that, those kind of things work out okay, right? Because they were 55 years, but not for the little guy.
Yeah, like Hamilton did Tremont.
Right.
That's all still sitting there. Yeah,
Exactly.
That hasn't changed.
never mind. So we had multiple versions.
Sorry.
So, and plus the other big difference is our density bonus units are not required to be affordable, and under the state law, they are. They carry an affordability restriction.
What is that?
It means that depending on what category the housing it's in, the unit could be restricted to low income, very low income, or moderate income. So there'd be income restrictions on who could rent the unit.
I guess what I'm wondering is if it's a 600-foot space, it's likely to be rented by that. I'm trying to think I can actually see this happening here because most of the customers, the smaller or renters of these little smaller spaces probably would be low income.
Right, but I think it actually carries a deed restriction. The
Right.
city
And the reason I'm
directs
thinking
it.
that might not be bad
It's not
because
up to the market.
If you had a business and you want to put a small space and you know your employees would qualify, it might totally be worth it. So I mean, I can't see that actually being something used here a lot. Because of the uniqueness of Avalon.
Right.
At the same time, are you going to put in a low-income housing on your piece of property?
Right.
If you're only a single-family resident, I can tell you.
Right.
I don't think it's-
And I think
And I agree with you on that too.
I mean,
And I think
you're shooting yourself in the foot.
the code, when you read through the new statutes from the state, it's kind of designed for large housing projects, where someone's building 100 units, and they would really like to get 120 units. And so they agree to restrict some of those units to affordable housing for 55 years. It's that type of incentive to get added density.
Is it always on that piece of property? Like,
Is the deed restriction always on
no,
that?
no, is the bonus density always on that particular lot? Say,
Yes.
say you want to
Yes.
build a
Yes.
large
Yes.
development, okay.
Right, so
Where
if
is
I'm
it-
a developer, I show up, I want to build 100 units, and I'm willing to restrict so many of them, then I get an extra 10 units, or whatever it is on the sliding scale, on that site. Even though the density for the site would only allow me to build 100 units, I actually get to build 110. So it makes the project more, in theory, more profitable, but because you're restricting the units, it balances out, is the concept.
And you at all can't make the, add the employee, as employee housing as well. It's just whomever lives there lives there. It can't be
Right.
employee at all. I mean, you can't restrict it to employee housing.
Is there any advantage of having an Avalon ordinance as opposed to just relying on the state? I'm trying to think of what, you know, this could just save us some time by.
I don't know what
There's a lot
we
of things
could
we just
change
rely on.
about it that would make it more palatable to us in our unique constricted environment. Elizabeth knows probably a little bit better about what areas we could tweak it to make it more,
I'm not sure there's a lot in here
No, I don't
that
think.
really makes a difference based on Avalon's unique
Yeah,
circumstances.
we rely on the state for other things too.
Right.
So.
Again, if we were in, you know, Long Beach, that's a different situation. But you're not gonna knock down a whole bunch of buildings and build, you know, a 100-unit apartment building, you know, where you wanna get 110 units on the site.
Except we do have one major landowner who could do something big. Is there any reason we
Discussed.
well, he'd be subject to the state requirements.
Right.
That's what yes, I can't think.
But on page 5, on the few on-menu incentives that have been considered in other jurisdictions, are any of those, and also the parking ratio standards that we could impact?
Right.
So do we want to discuss those? So some of you that are more savvy on all this lot coverage and lot width and floor area ratio, why don't you talk about it?
Is this just making it looser?
Looks like it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that, do we want to do that?
Also, Amanda, is this the kind that you can designate low, very low, low, moderate, that, of the average mean income, that you have to, you can designate sliding, like, you have this many low, if you got 4 more units, 1 would be low, 2 would be
developer.
moderate, or they all have to be the same?
No, the developer can decide.
The developer can decide.
But if they do very low, they get different incentives than if they do low, you know,
So there's like a sliding scale.
There's a
Right.
sliding scale.
So if you do very low income, maybe you get 20% extra density. If you low, maybe you get 15. If you get moderate, maybe you only get 5.
10, right.
It's
So moderate is the,
the higher income.
of the highest, or is also?
For affordability, most affordability programs, moderate is the highest.
Okay.
Well, here you're not going to be built, is that going to be an issue? Is like, you're only going to be limited a certain number anyhow because of space restrictions.
That's true.
So you can say, oh yeah, I'll only do moderate, not low, and I'm going to get the same amount no matter what.
Well, the lot initially supports so many units. If you do low income, maybe you get 10 more units on your lot. If you do very low, maybe you get 15 more units on your lot. So I think ultimately it's the developers looking at how it pencils out to have the extra units, but to have the income restricted on them.
But in practice here, nobody's going to be trying to decide between 10 or 15. You're going to have 1 or 2.
Well,
That's probably true.
except for the island company.
Except for island company projects, that's true.
Right.
For most people, it is a very small project, you're right.
So it's going to be all, I'm designating this as moderate because I want the higher income, and it's not going to affect how much you can build, because you're already doing the maximum with one or two.
Well, and they don't have to take the density bonus. So if I just want to come in and build, I can build on my lot 3 units, and that's all I want to do. Then I don't have to restrict any units, I don't have to do anything. And I can just build my lots, I don't have to utilize this ordinance.
Right, it's only when they want the extra density that this comes into play.
And then, is there something in that would keep it from, I know it says, units shall be available for occupancy for periods of not less than 30 consecutive days. I understand that, but how about, how do we guarantee that it's not used for seasonal housing instead of year-round? How do we check that out?
I don't know if we can.
Well,
Because that's hard, because most of the seasonal is 30 days, and then.
I know, but I think we.
But I see where she's.
So they'll work for 4 months and then they'll leave and leave the places vacant for 8 or 9 months. So what do we do about
How are
that?
you going to enforce?
To make
So-
it year-round.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So the question is, can we restrict the density bonus units to being year-round housing and not seasonal?
No, see, and this says year-round is 30 consecutive days, so that would have to be rewritten to say year-round means
Year-round.
12 months.
Well, that's the existing one that's.
Oh, okay.
So we can
Right.
change that?
So
Is that what your current ordinance says?
Yes.
Is that what I mean, the current?
And that was because we didn't want the density bonus units being utilized as transient
Transient,
units.
right.
Vacation rentals.
But now we don't want
But
them
now
to be
we
used as
want, we
seasonal.
want to get year-round housing.
Something so that there's no seasonality allowed.
But if I'm an employer and I build some bonus density units for housing for my employees, and I only need to employ for 5 months, are you forcing me to rent it year-round?
Yeah, I agree with Ole. I think if they're, let's say the SCI company is going
Yeah.
to build some new units, and they need units for 2 months, 3 months, and the rest of the time, they're probably going to lease them out at least as winter rentals to the town. So they-
But they can do that with
But now
the
they-
majority of what they build. It's only a small percentage that's the density bonus, that you could be restricted housing.
Well, I understand not making them vacation rentals and stuff like that, but to restrict the employer from building this stuff and having the extra housing, that wouldn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. I mean, if I was the employer and I was building it and I only need it for 3 months, that's how long I'm gonna put it in there. Now it's gonna sit empty for, 9 months. I'm probably gonna come to people in town and say, does anyone need a 9-month rental? Because you see this all the time now.
I don't think it has
And at least it's still out there.
I understand where Annie's coming from about year-round, but however, being in the business sense, I am short-staffed. I've been short-staffed year-round, and there's no, even though we do hire people in town, there's no one in town to employ to be
But-
employed. It's hard to find employees here on the island, and I would bring them in if we had housing.
But
for
what if you,
seasonal.
I'm not sure, because now you're talking about large-scale development. So if it's 60 units, what is the ratio on that? What, if you're getting a density bonus
20%.
on that, it's 20% on top of that, so what do we?
6 units.
Yeah, so it really is, I mean, I'm just saying that
12, I'm sorry, 12.
12 units and you're building 60, and so to say, well, we have full-time employees that could have these all year round, and then we've got 60 that can be for 3 months. I mean, I think if our issue here is to increase affordable housing for people, I think it's self-defeating to say you could take those and make them 3 months when you're building a substantial amount of units that can be year-round, or short-term, or whatever you want.
Say you're the builder, though,
Mm-hmm.
and you just need them short-term, why would you possibly build them year-round? Why would you get the extra density then, if you only need them 3 months out of
Well,
the year?
then they don't
Like you
have
say,
to.
Why wouldn't you, just economics would say, I'm gonna lease it out the other 9 months.
Great, then don't go for a density bonus unit. If you don't, that's what I think. If you have 60 that you can do anything you want with, and then you get another 12 that you are restricted to having them be full-time housing, I don't see that as a real hindrance to development of us on that scale.
Well, I think ultimately the question is will the state allow us, one, to restrict the density bonus units to non-transient occupancy, which I think we can.
Yes.
The second question is, can we restrict them to where they have to be year-round occupied? And I think, to me, I think the challenge may be defining what is seasonal, because each business has different seasons.
But we also need to take in consideration the biggest company on the island employs over how many, 800 people?
Was 25% of the
Yeah,
25%.
so, I mean, it's not realistic to say that they're not gonna be, I mean, they're gonna have to import employees. They are, I mean, that's just, and where are they gonna stay? And so if you're gonna really say, oh, no, only year-round, that's just not realistic, because the business that I have at the marketplace in the hotel, it's 52 rooms with, you know, all that tenant space. It's hard to employ, and it's hard to house employees that I don't have nearly at 40. They have hundreds. So, I mean,
But
we're
once
gonna have
again,
to be a little.
They have the ability to do it for the 60 units that they build. They still have the ability to have it be for 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, 6 months. We're just saying the density bonus units cannot be transient rentals.
Yeah. And the other
Right.
part,
Why don't
they're
And they
not
have to be
wanting, they're
affordable.
not wanting to stop at 50 units, you know that as well. They want to, you know, they're talking about putting some up where Triana is and some there. So,
But 30 days or more is not transient rental,
Right,
is it?
we don't want transient rental.
30
Right.
days, a 30-day lease is not transient rental. There's no 12% bed tax, it's not a transient
Right.
rental.
that's
And I-
correct.
That's what I'm, so
And I
I'm
think-
saying, if you have employees and you need them for 4 months out of the year, and you've only rented it for 4 months to these employees, then you're gonna figure out what you're gonna do with it. I think you're defeating the purpose. No one's gonna come in and build it.
But-
You're trying to promote people, you're trying to promote someone like
Well,
the island.
But we're
I-
also-
okay,
Wait, other than the island company, though, when we meet with Saffron and those people, they want that, they need that monthly money coming in. There's no way a private, those kind of developers would come in and build
I
something.
understand, but I
But-
think the island company needs that kind of money too. They're not gonna let something sit for
No, I
9
see.
months empty.
But I think we're losing, I think we are losing sight of the fact that density bonus is something the developer comes and asks for.
Right.
They come to us and say, I want to put more units in my project than the zoning allows. And the state says, okay, if you want to have extra units, those extra units cannot carry these restrictions. So the developer is already deciding up front if these extra units are worth having the restrictions on them. Our question is, do we want to try to come up with some different ordinance just for Avalon, or do we want to just stay with the state density bonus laws as they're written? One, because the likelihood that people are asking for density bonus is not going to be that great for us, or that many number of times, because we only have one developer that's looking at really large projects. So if someone wants to come in and ask for additional density, are we comfortable imposing the state restriction?
In-state restriction doesn't include non-transit.
That's their definition, yes.
Yeah, so
So it sounds like it doesn't address it, so
maybe that's something we
could
should
we
address.
add that one? Could we tag that onto the state?
So we'd have to adopt our own ordinance, which we can do. The concern that I would have is you're adding, it's almost a disincentive, right? Because if they're coming in and they only want to do certain things and you're requiring them to do more than that, it's sort of going against the concept of encouraging people to use this ordinance and to build more units. I guess I'm a little unclear not being
I
on the
guess I'm
island
asking just
regularly.
because if it's 30 days or more, it's non-transit, and it's not a vacation rental, obviously. And that's, I would think, what we would look at. So you've got more units in the town, and they're not sucked up by CUPs that are just sitting empty the whole year.
So the
How's
density,
someone?
And I just want to ask a clarification question. The density bonus units would be under they will be, I'm going to say, if I'm a developer, I would go for moderate because it would be, so that's those particular units that they get because of a density bonus are always going to be either low and moderate, right?
Very low, low, or moderate.
Oh, very low, low, or moderate. So that's up to, and that's up to the developer.
They have to be rented at that cost, or at,
Okay.
and made available to people who income qualify.
Okay.
But I don't think, I'm sorry, I didn't believe that they could say they're all going to be moderate, though. Can they say that, or
She
there'll
said
be
that.
percentages of each?
No, not on
No.
this one.
No, if we did our own
choose.
ordinance,
If you-
we can do that.
Right.
Oh,
But
okay.
Not if it's,
If they come in and they say, I want to build 15 units, so I qualify for an extra 2 units if I do moderate income.
Right.
But if I do low income, I qualify for an extra 3 units. Because with more restriction, right, you get more units.
Right.
But then the city has to turn around and say, okay, so you want to do 3 very low or low income units. Therefore, we have to give you 3 incentives. A setback waiver, a height waiver, and parking waiver, whatever. Those are all set out.
Right.
And you can't deny their requested concession or waiver unless you can make certain findings. And that would be the same whether you adopt your own ordinance or not. Does
And
that
then-
answer it?
Yeah, kind of. And then we can designate populations if we want, seniors, disabled vets,
right.
stuff like that, which,
For the density
Or
bonus
the
units.
state does.
yeah.
So you could start by putting just the state density bonus, repealing your own and going with the state density bonus. And then after that's been on the books for 6 months, we can bring it back and you can see how it's working. We may or may not have gotten any applications, and then we can always adjust. It's up to you. Or we can go through each one of
Well,
the
we have to go
criteria.
through the process in any event where the planning commission is going to receive the draft ordinance,
Yes.
make a recommendation to the city council. So there's another bite at the apple, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was just to get the
Right,
topic out here and
the
get y'all thinking
framework,
about it.
so.
And lowering parking ratios is something then the planning commission should look at as well in there, because especially if they're only going to be rented for 4 months out of the year, they shouldn't need a lot of vehicles. Okay.
And so that always leads me to believe limiting the number of stickers.
I think it's
So-
easier to limit the sticker, just not call it a qualifying unit for purposes of the vehicle.
Agreed.
So the density bonus units would not qualify for a vehicle.
Right.
So it would be a habit.
Okay,
That's
but
if
what
your
if they're a
vehicle is
mile
not-
past the public transport?
I'm sorry.
I mean, if I'm building all these units and I'm way up the canyon,
Everybody's within close.
Everybody's within-
Dial Reinhardt.
well, I agree, but I think there's going to be some pushback on that
Dial
one.
Reinhardt,
I
it's
don't
available
think
to
so.
them.
Okay, I'm all for it, but I bet there's going to be some pushback on that one.
Well, I think that.
But it brings down their building costs.
Yeah, and I think if we don't, I don't think we should issue.
Yeah.
I don't, just like commercial buildings, I think we need to add parking spaces to every single one in the code anyway.
Yeah.
So-
The bonus density unit has someone in it renting it year-round, and they can't get a vehicle.
That's what, right now, this body,
what
the
you're
majority of the,
proposing.
well, the ones that are speaking out, that's what they're saying.
But what is the, why? I mean, I want to know your reasoning
So the
there.
year-round person that's living there, I'm just saying, you work at Edison, you're not gonna take the bus to Edison every morning at 6.
Right.
Well, Edison employees all get a vehicle anyway, so.
Yeah.
And you don't qualify for the income level either.
But why wouldn't you want them to, just because it increases the cost for the builder?
Well, okay.
Tell me what
Well, and
what do you
well,
see, Anita?
Well, looking at this site, which is the site that they would like.
Right.
Okay, and we have a new Vons.
Right.
Right there, and everything is so close, and we have public transportation. If we have to tweak our public transportation to give them either a cheaper access or something, maybe we do that. Or maybe, they get a couple, maybe we just say they have a couple spaces for car share or something out of the 60 units. Maybe we could, something like that. But to give everybody a car at their spot, I don't think is necessary, is what we should be doing. Okay, because
Right.
we're trying to get.
I was just wondering what.
You know, if you're doing another 12
And then, is there
units,
anything in the
for
state
example,
law that
Another
deals
12
with developer
cars.
fees
Okay.
on these
I get
units?
that.
Are they, is there any reference, or they just are subject to all the, if we had developer fees per unit, it would apply to these as
Yes.
well? Okay. Or when we have developer fees?
When we have developer fees.
Whenever that shows up.
I'm sorry, can I just make sure I understood that? So was your question, once the developer fees are in place, they would also apply to bonus density? Is that right?
They apply to the project, yeah.
But,
You can't have special fees for the density
Right.
bonus units,
But-
but if you have impact fees,
The same, right, the
Your
same
impact fees
formula
apply.
that applies to any unit applies to those units.
no, but we have the ability to waive or reduce those fees, right?
As part of a
As part of an incentive.
It's
Yes.
part of a
But
development
incentives.
agreement.
So we start with those numbers, and then if we
Yeah.
want to go below those.
Okay, so we're going to follow the state one for 6 months and come back into our own.
Well, it's going to have to come through the process, and
Anyway.
I need to
It'll take
see
that
and
long
hold
anyway.
and read something, so,
Okay,
which we'll get a chance
right.
to do.
are we totally done with these? This one?
One more.
I know, but we're
more.
gonna just see.
So just so we're clear, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna bring back an ordinance repealing what's on your books, because it's inconsistent with state law. Then we're gonna draft a density bonus ordinance for you that follows state, that basically adopts state law, but adds tweaks related to parking, and, if we can, related to the occupancy. Transient occupancy issue. We'll see if we can draft something, and that way you guys can talk around that when we bring it back to the planning commission.
So, let me ask on that, the last one. So if I have, do they have to go by the federal guidelines? And like if I'm a husband and wife and I got a boy and a girl, they each have to have their own bedroom?
HUD requires that, yes. But if there's no HUD money, if there's no federal money in the
Okay,
project,
then it's okay.
then they can do what they want.
Oh, great, okay.
It's only if they have HUD money or federal money in the
Oh.
project are they required after the age of 5 to have a
Right.
separate bedroom per sex.
Yeah,
You can
okay.
have a boy and a girl over 5 sharing a bedroom. In HUD.
Wouldn't you love to have that, Micah? She took your kids to
So
that.
glad I have 3 boys. You're gonna have to identify as something else.
Okay,
Okay,
catching up. Oops, I got too far. Okay, so that's density bonus.
Inclusionary.
We ready for the third one?
sure.
Okay.
There is a test at following this. I know.
I told you it was going to be a long afternoon.
No, we're doing good.
You guys are doing
Making good time.
great. We're making good progress. All right, so inclusionary housing. Inclusionary housing is a zoning ordinance or a policy that it requires or encourages the inclusion of low and moderate income units in residential developments. Some programs apply to commercial developments also, and there have been just a boatload of changes to inclusionary housing law in the past few years. So, back in the day, a city would have an inclusionary housing ordinance that said if you are building a rental project or a for sale project, you would have to include X number of affordable units. In 2009, there were a number of court decisions. The first was the Palmer decision, or the big one was the Palmer decision. And this was a challenge to an inclusionary housing requirement for rental units. So a developer was out, they're building a new, 100 units of apartments, and the city said, okay, well, we have an inclusionary ordinance, so you have to build 10 or whatever it was and make it affordable to low or moderate income people. They challenged that under the theory that it conflicted with the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which is rent control. The Rent Control Act said that landlords get to set the initial rents. And so because your inclusionary housing ordinance was saying, no, you have to rent at X, the court found that it was inconsistent, and therefore inclusionary housing ordinance for rental projects were invalid. So as of 2009, you could no longer have an inclusionary housing program for rental projects. So in 2010, we came in, we said, oh, that's a problem, updated your ordinance. So your ordinance was revised to say that if you want to include inclusionary housing in your rental project,
we will do an agreement with you, and therefore, we can give you some incentive. And so it was a voluntary option. So that's where your ordinance is today. Whoops, too far. Also in 2009 was the Patterson decision. Now, this challenged the city of, I think it was San Jose, inclusionary housing ordinance, which had an in lieu fee. I think it was it was bad facts. So in whatever city, I'm pretty sure it was San Jose,
It's San Jose.
they entered into an agreement with the developer that said, hey, great, you're going to pay an in lieu fee. The day they entered into that agreement with them, the fee was $734. Then they updated their ordinance and said, no, it's $20,000 a unit. Not surprisingly, the developer reacted poorly. So they sued, said it was unconstitutional, and the court agreed, which was pretty shocking. Normally, the theory had been that these in lieu fees were imposed under sort of a city's general police powers, or regulatory powers, and so we were able to set a fee as to what that was. The court came back and said, no, you need a nexus study. You need to show that this fee is reasonably related to the impact, sort of like the development impact fees that we were just talking about. So it was a whole sort of new way of looking at it, and it invalidated the ability to do these in lieu fees. So come the end of 2009, really the only thing left on the books is you could do an inclusionary housing requirement for a for sale unit. Not a rental unit, not an in lieu fee. So it really sort of brought the whole inclusionary housing world to its knees. Then you fast forward to 2012 and redevelopment is dissolved. Redevelopment goes away. There's no longer low and moderate income housing funds that can be used to help offset some of these issues and support the development of low income housing. So now you really have no units being built. Then you come, it's an ugly story, but
We're back where we started.
at the same time, the state keeps saying we have an affordable housing crisis, we have a housing crisis, we have a housing crisis, we need to build units. So, they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. We have no ability to make it happen, but it needs to happen. So you get to 2015, and the San Jose ordinance gets challenged. Again, it's an in lieu fee, and the California Supreme Court chimes in this time, and they say, no, you can have an inclusionary housing ordinance. It is under the city's regulatory powers, and you do not need a nexus study for a residential program. So we're working our way back to where we wanted to be. Then you get to 2017, and the governor approves 15 different housing bills. And in and amongst them was a bill called the Palmer Fix. So the first case that I talked about was the Palmer case, which did away with the rental inclusionary housing program. This new law, AB 1505, is known as the Palmer Fix. And so it is back. So we are now back to where we started. You can do a rental housing inclusionary program as long as it meets certain criteria. We can do an inclusionary housing requirement for affordable housing. It does not require a nexus study. Our ordinance is still out of date by a lot. There's a lot of changes in the law. So we have sort of some fundamental big policy questions that are presented to you. I prepared for you your ordinance with some comments and questions. I don't know if that got distributed to everybody.
I think so. That's the one that's got the comments on the side.
Yeah.
It's got all the little boxes.
It's got all the little boxes on the side. It's not in the packet that I have for some reason.
Did we get that?
Did you distribute it in our boxes or something?
It's not.
It should have been attached. Okay. Then we need
Yeah, the density bonus ordinance that I did, and
Is
that is
all
not
of that
included.
wrapped up in your other questions that you posed in
Yes,
there?
they're all sort of summarized in there, so we can
Okay.
still go
Do they
through
need
it.
To go
Okay.
through that, or can we go through?
Yeah.
We can still go through it and hit the big
Okay.
topics, and then again, you do get 2 more bites at the apple, one at the planning
Okay.
commission and one. But if you want to see it, we can always forward that to you. I'm not sure what happened there. So the big sort of issues are, one, in an inclusionary housing ordinance, we need to provide alternative means of compliance besides building those units. You have to give the developer options. It could be an in lieu fee, it could be land dedication, it could be off-site construction, it can be acquiring existing units and putting covenants on it, it can be rehabilitating existing units. There's lots of ways to get there. We need to give them options. Our ordinance doesn't currently give them options. So we need to think about what options might be okay. Secondly, because our ordinance has to be amended to get current with the law anyway, there's a new requirement that if you mandate more than 15% of the project's rental units to be available to households of low income, so making less than 80% of area median income, which I think is around, I want to say it's $84,000. No, that's moderate.
That's right. That sounds about right.
Is that about right? Somewhere in that range. Then your ordinance is subject to review by HCD. If HCD reviews our ordinance, then they can require us to prepare an economic feasibility study, and basically we have to defend our ordinance that this does not unduly constrain the production of housing. So by requiring so many units to be affordable, it makes projects less profitable, so you reduce the amount of units that end up getting built because there's not a profit to be made.
Elizabeth, I found a list of links to ordinances that have been adopted so far and had been submitted to HCD, but I didn't see any indication that HCD had even reviewed or commented on any of them.
We have not seen anything come back.
Okay.
So we have to send it, but I can't guarantee you what they're going to say or do because there's no experience yet. Okay. So your ordinance currently has a 20% requirement. Mm-hmm. If during the process of our amending you reduce it to 15, you take it out of HCD's hands.
Good move.
It's up to you guys. I could tell you with the demise of redevelopment and dealing with DOF, it's been a challenge. HCD can be challenging also, so it's up to you. If you really want to stick with the 20%, we could do that. But we'll end up having potentially to defend the ordinance and
It's going to cost money.
It could cost you money. We could do it in-house
But the
if we
difference
have the
is if
expertise.
a developer says they're going to build 60 units, you get 9 inclusionary versus 12.
Correct.
I mean, it's
15 to 20%.
It can be a significant number of units.
So those are issues. This slide goes through what I was just talking about. Also, your current inclusionary ordinance has you setting the in lieu fee if they're going to be using the in lieu fee option on a case-by-case basis. We recommend that you have an in lieu fee, not a case-by-case basis.
And it looks like most cities just do a per square foot.
Correct.
Okay.
Otherwise, you end up with an argument that it's arbitrary. And I don't like this developer, so I'm charging them $100 a square foot. I do like this developer, so I'm charging them $20 a square foot. Unless we have real justifications for a different fee, depending on, certain really articulated criteria, I would recommend you just develop an in lieu fee.
If you own the land already versus someone has to go out and buy the land and build, can you have two different fees? Because somebody already owns the land.
Why would you charge them a different fee just because they own the land?
Because the in lieu fee can cover the cost of construction and the cost of acquiring the land.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you almost need 2 feet. 2 feet?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I'm not glad.
So if I own a piece of land right now and I build a house or want to build stuff on it, it's less expensive for me than if I have to go out and buy the land and build on it.
Right, but the in lieu fee is designed to help offset the impact to housing. So whether or not you own the land doesn't change the impact to housing, right?
So
it affects your bottom line as the developer.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But the in lieu fee is supposed to...
Is to fill that gap.
Is to fill the gap.
Right.
But if the developer wants to throw land into the deal.
Now, I agree. If that's a different option.
I'm sorry.
If one of the things, in order for them, I'm sorry.
So they wouldn't pay an in lieu fee and donate land?
They would do one or the other.
You could do both. You could have
A sliding scale.
sliding scale. If the city has to go out and buy the land, or the housing agency has to buy the land and build it, it's X amount for the fee. If the developer donates land to the city for them to build on, then they take the dollar cost to build on it, and you use that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think the goal is that the inclusionary says you have to provide inclusionary units, or we'll accept land in exchange for those units, or we'll accept an in lieu fee in exchange for those units. Then what the city does with that land or that fee is up to whatever the city program.
Right. But, the problem here is that there's so much land within the city that's not accessible by way of sewer or doesn't have water. So I think you'd have to, accepting land is not necessarily a viable option.
So if your in lieu fee is $20,000 a unit, then you would multiply that time. So if they're building 100 units, and it's $20,000 a unit, you would do a math calculation, come up with a number, and that's the value of the land that would get donated usually.
But I think
But
the
you don't
problem
have
is
to.
land may not be available.
Right.
So-
But it's just one of the options.
Right, so even if you had the money.
Right.
And the in lieu fee applies to all the units in the development or just the inclusionary units?
The inclusion.
Just the inclusion.
That's what I thought, okay.
So $20,000 is nothing.
Right, so I would like
she was just throwing it.
someone,
I was just
I'm hoping we can have just a little bit of conversation to help, at least for me to feel a little more comfortable, because in my notes, I kept writing no, 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 no. For some reason, it doesn't feel right to me to want to be able to allow for an in lieu fee, because our problem is housing. Our problem is the lack of housing. And so if we're allowing money to come into, if we take an in lieu fee, then that will go into our coffers to be used for housing, but it doesn't help us solve our housing issues. And so I guess I'm missing something in there where.
Well, I could think, I was thinking, okay, for instance, the East Whitley property, we would like to gather more money together and add some units to that property. But at that point, we're kind of done. Unless we were going to then do open market purchases. That would really be the only two things that we would be able to do with that, because we don't really have land other than that property. So
the land as an incentive would be good.
Because we don't have land.
Because we don't have land.
One person.
But we'd have to be able to designate that it was within the developed area part of town, or that sewers were.
Oh, yeah, we're not going to.
Right, we're not going to, right,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
But does everyone else feel comfortable with allowing an in lieu fee? It seems like it would be better just at the moment
Right.
of development to say, build the unit and let's be done.
Well, given that the person the entity that's likely to be doing the development already has the land and has indicated an interest
again,
in building the
you have to
housing,
give
right
them
now, it
options.
certainly does, yeah.
Right.
So you have to give them all of those options, the in
You have to
lieu,
give
the-
them some options.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
So-
like, there are other options available to them or to anybody, not just one, but there's 3 other options on the table as well.
Right.
Well, it seems like.
And there may be more. These are just a sampling.
So,
It seems like
I'm for
Cindy
removing
has a
it.
great point there, because, we can get all the fees that they could give us, but what are we gonna do with them? Because we don't have land or anywhere that we can
Right.
build. So if these developers are coming in and willing to build these units, and, maybe a set fee, but nothing, I don't think we should penalize them for trying to create housing for our city when
And I think,
we can't do it.
But if it's not inclusionary housing, then
I think in lieu fees work where you have programs in place to spend the money. You already have a way that you can spend the money. And we all know we have had difficulty spending the money that we have. I think incentives have alternate incentives, land dedication, great, rehabbing existing homes, and then they get an affordability covenant on them. One of the ideas I thought of is if someone wants to convert a home that's a transient that's currently in the transient market, and they want to take it out of the transient market and put a 55-year covenant on it for affordable housing, then that's a gain to us because it's now a house that's locked in for affordable housing. So,
Like Vaughn's.
like Fonts or whatever.
needed
So
housing.
it may be the consensus that the in lieu fee is our least popular choice because we have challenges being able to have programs to spend the money, but conversion, rehab, land dedication is our better choices, and the developer, or actually building the units, then the developer, we've given them options.
But again, if we give them the in lieu fee, I mean, if they have the option of choosing it and we're saying we don't want that on the table, if they get to choose, then we don't want their money.
My understanding is we don't have to allow an in lieu fee, but we have to provide them, we have to provide them some options.
So if they want to just pay us off, we can say no, planning commission could say no?
We could just not have it in the ordinance.
Yes.
Now, you
Or
could-
you just don't have it in the, that's what I'm saying. If we're going to have the guts to say, no, we don't want your money, we want land or whatever, these are your
Right.
other options, we should.
However,
Build the unit.
is the in lieu fee set by us?
Yes.
Or is it a percentage based on some kind of other?
Set by you.
It's set
So,
by us.
I mean, you could make it,
50,000. You
Right,
can't build,
but-
you can't build anything for 50 grand.
Well, that's what I'm saying, well, 20, I mean, at this point, we were just using that 20 grand. I don't want people to
Right.
think in that box.
No, I
Because we
know.
could set the, give them options, but put the in lieu so
Right.
that it would mean some money to the city that can do something.
But I think we're all really frustrated of knowing that we have had a pot of money for a long time, and we've tried several different times to try to figure out a way to spend it, and that's very difficult for us because of.
What's that? Community Okay, nobody's donated money to the city's housing fund. So what do
there's
you-
a couple fundamental issues that we kind of need to think about. So the first one is the city comfortable with the 20% inclusionary housing, or do you want to drop it to 15 and avoid review by HCD?
I'd say 20.
I'm good
Yeah.
with 20.
Yeah.
Good with 20.
Just because, to me, the difference, if you're looking at a 60-unit project, 9 units versus 12 units, that's.
a big difference.
It can make a big difference.
And can I,
Yeah.
with,
And as I said, that list, half the cities in California have submitted to HCD, so the cities seem to be opting to go with a higher percentage than 15, yeah.
can I also, with this, I agree with Pam, but how, when someone builds a commercial building and then they have to have housing, the per employees or how big the building is, 50%, 20%, whatever. My whole issue, I have a hard time with this banking and credits and I'm building this big building, but I have housing and I have this many credits left, and I'm shutting this building down and I'm taking the employees from here and I'm using them to open up my new business, and but you still see that business in business, and that is, that to me that's another issue of housing. That's how housing, we're so backed up in housing and we have no housing, and we're allowing people to say, like for Vaughn's, I'm going to take my employees from that existing building and I'm going to shuffle them to this 22,000 square foot building, and this building's 5,000. Really? You're not going to hire employees? I mean, this is where it starts. This is part of our housing crisis right here.
It totally is.
And here we are again, putting more stuff on the books, putting all these rules, but yet we're allowing, I hate to say it, but the country club, taking their employees, bringing them down to the grill, they're still running business up there. So, city, this is part of our housing problem.
But Yuli, I'm just going to chime in and say that those decisions are made by the Planning Commission, and the Vaughn's decision
I wasn't on those decisions.
Right, but
so.
I'm not suggesting that you were, but I am saying that it needs to be called out. Those decisions, those agreements are allowed by the Planning Commission and for Vaughn's by the City Council. So
But I think
we
part of the
have
problem
those-
too, and I'm the first to say, is that we came up with this great idea of, hey, if you're going to build a new commercial enterprise, you need to provide housing for 50% of your peak season employees. It sounded great, and then we did not do anything in the way of coming up with regulations or definitions or policies or procedures, and that is something that, if we want to continue with this requirement, which I think we should, needs to be included. But then you're just making, I mean, you kind of have to, it's not like you can go to other cities and see what they're doing. There's no state law on it. We kind of have to, pull from the experience that we've had and see, okay, that didn't work with Vons. Like, we should have really been on top of that, or some other way of keeping track.
Well,
So that raises-
and I'm sorry, but.
But
we
then we're
should
kind of
be-
jumping
we
down the
should-
line
I know,
here.
but we should be keeping track of that, and we should have some enforcement of that.
Well, and we also
Okay,
should,
all right,
going
I'm
forward,
sorry.
Going forward,
So-
I had to make that statement going forward,
Right.
because it has
The
to do
condition of
with this.
approval for Vons is they will have to certify how many employees they currently have at the two stores. They will compare it to the employees at the big new store, and if there is an
Deficit.
overrun of employees, they will be subject to inclusionary housing.
Right.
But I think the weird thing about that one though is we allowed them to transfer
Yes, I agree.
and strip whatever
Right.
grandfathering the old law.
It was
had
torture.
over to
Right.
the new one.
Torture.
Right.
So now we have this kind of strange old bonds property that when somebody comes in and says, I want to
We'll
do
need to
exactly
comply.
what used to be there, we're going to require them to provide
To
housing.
comply.
I agree.
Yes.
Which is
Yes.
probably kicking the can.
Can we make it into housing?
It doesn't have any water.
Right.
It doesn't have any water. Doesn't
Right,
have any
in the water, they took the
You can
water.
do what you
No,
want.
it doesn't have
So-
water.
It doesn't have any water. You
So
can do
on
whatever you
the-
want.
Okay, so, back to this one. So I think, number 2 on the list is, are we comfortable with voluntary set aside for rental units? The state law allows us to
So you used
require
to
it
have a
for-
requirement, and then there was the Palmer decision, so we switched it to voluntary so that you were still able to have it. And now state law has switched back, so you have the
Right.
ability to make it a
No, it should be
requirement.
mandatory.
Right, okay,
So you want to go back to required
Right.
and stay at the 20%.
right. And are we required for the city to have to participate financially, Elizabeth?
No, not anymore. That was.
That was
so
the old one.
Before,
Okay.
the way to do it, because you couldn't require them, you would say, if you voluntarily want to do it, the city's going to give you an incentive.
Okay.
But now we don't have, we'll
Okay.
delete that incentive part because it's
Good.
not relevant anymore.
The third one was, do we want to keep a middle income category for inclusionary?
So middle income is very difficult. State law only addresses low and moderate income. Middle income is a creature of your own.
So what did you say?
Moderate.
Moderate
Middle.
was around 70, what did you say?
It's
Moderate is
between 70 and
120 of
80,000 for a
AMI.
family of 4.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's like $84,000 for
Family.
LA County or something like that.
Right, so moderate is 80% of AMI.
Is that based on Los Angeles?
It's based on the LA County median income. We created middle income, which was 120% of AMI.
Well, actually, it's defined as 120 to 150.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we created an additional category for
Right.
middle income. At one time, the idea is that we would perhaps use our housing trust fund monies, which were not
Which are your
restricted by
in-lieu fees.
redevelopment, for middle income. But that was a long time ago, the housing trust fund's not being funded. And so I guess under our the question is, in our inclusionary ordinance, can we include middle income as an obligation?
So the statutes only authorize inclusionary housing for low and moderate.
But of course, what developer is going to say, oh, no, I don't want middle income people who qualify to pay a higher rent? So
So
my
are you
feeling is
going
if
to
we have
give-
protections that require that a
Are you
certain percentage be
Going to give
for,
them development incentives
right,
to restrict to middle income is the question.
right.
So somebody's making 100%, 150%
Right.
of AMI under your ordinance, and you're going to waive your parking and your building setback
Right.
requirements for them?
Yeah.
You can. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the advantage is to the city.
Low and very low.
So
Well, the only thing I would say is that because the housing crisis cuts across so many income levels that it would have some fairness feel to it if you said, okay, 10% of the units are going to be for middle, 45 for moderate and 45 for low, that you would at least be recognizing that even middle-income people are having difficulty finding rental housing. I mean, we just don't have that much rental housing.
And could you even further refine?
I mean, and I just made up those percentages.
Right,
But what
but
I'm
you
saying
could
is
even-
obviously lower percentage for middle, recognizing that those people have at least money to go.
And you can even refine that further by saying for 20 units or more.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So that,
right.
and that would be if you didn't have that many units that you were building, that you shouldn't,
Yeah.
like, you know what I'm, so
Yeah.
that, so it would be based also on the number of units being
Right.
constructed. Is that possible?
It is possible, but again, do you want to waive development standards and those sorts of things for for restricting units? Because you're going to put a covenant on it, saying that they have to rent it to someone who makes 120 to 150% of AMI. So what is that, $100,000 to $140,000?
Well, there's not very many people here that are going to do huge developments. So, I can see having that option for many places, but if it's a smaller development, I don't know who that would be, but, then you just could not put that criteria on there.
We can write it in. I will tell you that it is vulnerable because it is not authorized by state law, and the state law is pretty clear on what you're allowed to do and not do. So if someone wanted to challenge it, I do think you would be at risk.
Is this something HCI would pick up?
And one more time?
If we kept it to the 20%, and when we send out the ladder to be approved, would they flag that as inappropriate?
They might.
They might question.
So if you keep the
have us
20%, so we
justify
have
it.
to send it to HCD, and then you include this provision for middle income.
And the question is, what's more important to us? I mean, I happen to like the idea that we include middle income because there is a lot of people in town that are, could benefit from that. And my only concern is what do we have to give up to the developer to get the middle income units? I don't know what that is.
How's that question answered?
You put it on the books and see what they ask for.
Oh.
So let's make a deal.
Run it up the flagpole.
Well,
No, but
they would
the
want it because they're
HCD's
getting
issue is going to be whether you are furthering a valid housing goal.
Right.
Low and
Right.
moderate income housing goal.
An affordable housing goal.
Yes. And middle income would not
Right,
qualify
not
in their
qualify.
minds.
Middle income would probably meet our market rate RENA requirements.
So it's unclear why you're giving development
Right.
incentives
Right.
for really market rate
Well,
housing.
I agree. It didn't have it in there before.
So,
It
I
got
mean, it's up to you
amended.
guys. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to, from HCD's perspective, these are the questions we're
Right.
going to have to
I-
answer. So,
Yeah.
So yay or nay to middle income?
Nay.
I would say nay.
Okay.
Did you say no?
I can count.
all right.
Well, I know, but I'm wondering, because it says we could, because our current ordinance provides for middle income, but you're saying now it might not fly.
It may
It
not.
never-
Right. It didn't
never did.
originally, and it was added
Oh,
during the.
Untested middle income.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
All right, so I think I heard earlier we're not a fan of in lieu fees. Our next question is, the city's current ordinance does not include a set in lieu fee. Do we want to continue to have an in lieu fee option? And if so, do you want to set it? Again, I have concerns about the sort of arbitrary, as the project comes in, we set it, because that just leaves you to challenge.
No in
Nope.
No, and I think the consensus was no to the in lieu fees.
All right, so if we're not going to do in lieu fees, we do have to provide alternatives.
Yeah.
So the other options that I've identified are build the units on site,
Right.
dedicate land,
Giving them an option.
Uh-huh.
or buy and rehabilitate comparable number of affordable units.
Well, why couldn't they build the required units off-site if they have another piece of property?
They could.
They could.
Okay.
That makes sense. It's more likely to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just say if they're going to dedicate land to the city, that it would have to be developable. Or,
Yeah.
yeah, hooked up to the infrastructure, something like
And what
that.
if they give you a huge piece of land? You gonna turn it down because it doesn't have water and power?
No, they will subdivide it and sell it off.
That's what I'm saying. Because it may not have water and power right now.
Okay, what if it's Riley's Pond behind Joe Machado Field?
What if it's this whole section back behind the golf course, you can turn it down?
Wow.
I would say you're crazy to do it.
I would say that's development.
It's developable.
There may not, you know.
Yeah, it's just expensive, that's why they didn't want to build up there, that's.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right,
just
I mean,
'cause
there
they-
are lots where it would be prohibitive, What would we do with that property?
Yeah.
So maybe,
It's a negotiation.
Yeah.
so maybe the restrictions are it has to be in the city limits.
Oh, it definitely, yeah.
Not Cottonwood.
That one never happened.
And all these other, I'm sorry, and buy and rehabilitate, we liked all of those except for the in lieu fee, right?
Right.
Okay. So all this other stuff stays the same, all these other things on the top? There hasn't been a problem with any of the stuff that's in the current argument?
No, I'm getting to that.
I have one question. So
I got
one of
it.
the way it was stated here, it says dedicate land equal in value to the in lieu fee, but we're not doing an in lieu fee. So how about land large enough to accommodate the number of inclusionary units that you need to build?
Oh, I see, I like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
So the
suggestion.
land has to be zoned large enough to include, to accommodate the number of units that it's.
Right,
that
no, that's good.
So can anybody combine two of these? Like, can I apply under any way inclusionary and density bonus?
Sure.
Or, okay, so these can.
Because density bonus just gives you more units in exchange for affordability. Inclusionary says your original number of units, some of them have to be affordable.
Okay,
Or you have to do these other things.
okay, bless you.
So,
Okay.
couple more things. We're almost near the end. Your current ordinance has a extraordinary amount of detail in it that doesn't really need to be in the ordinance. What I would recommend, kind of along the lines of what you were suggesting earlier, Councilmember Albers, is that we should have some implementation guidelines for how this is really going to work, and take some of this detail out of your ordinance, so that if we find that certain things aren't working, we have the ability to change it through policy, not through ordinance. So there's a lot in your ordinance about sort of compliance and qualifications and blah, 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 blah. And it's
But
not
I think we
required.
were, I mean, part of that had to do with the fact that we really wanted to ensure that these were not just units that were, occupied by somebody who's in Palm Springs during the winter and is here during the summer. That they were, people who were part of the community, employed, those kinds of things.
And all of that
Yeah,
can
it
still be
in
addressed.
it.
It just
Okay.
doesn't need to be codified
Yeah.
in your ordinance.
Sure.
And I think you'll find from a implementation standpoint that as we hit a hiccup, if it's not in the ordinance, it's easier to address if it's in an implementation regulation or a guideline. So we would ideally pull out some of this stuff and put it into an implementation guideline that would go along with the ordinance. So you'd still get the opportunity to review it and approve it and have an opinion on it. It's just not going to be codified.
So on inclusionary, it says one household member must be a qualified employee, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and whoever builds these they will be the ones that are carrying out what the rules are. But my question is, can we put a restriction that if they retire or get fired, they don't have to move out?
So if somebody builds inclusionary units that they are using for employee housing,
Oh, sorry.
can we require them to,
Keep them there because they might be able to find another job or.
that they can't, that as the landlord, they cannot,
They would have a lease, so it would
They
just be
would-
the terms of their lease. So I'm renting a unit from you for a 6-month period or whatever it is, and then it would just, if I lost my job or whatever, the term of my lease is the term of my lease.
No, but.
No, we had some issues with.
Employee.
What?
Now you gotta provide them housing the rest of their life?
Well, no, but if I-
Employee because they were a horrible employee.
Okay, so
Now
I-
gotta make sure they have a place to live.
No, so I build the housing, and I say, okay, but you can only stay there as long as you work for me. But if you go to find a job with someone else, you have to move out.
I don't think they can apply those rules to the inclusionary
That's what I'm
housing
asking.
units.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I just want that to be clear
Okay.
in here.
But we did have some rules, as I recall, that said that you could earn a certain percentage over the amount and not lose your housing for the remainder of the rental term or something like that.
And that
we didn't
would-
want to disincentivize people from improving their lives.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Or if I took a job, a better job someplace else, and now all of a sudden I'm stuck, I'm homeless because my housing was a benefit associated with my prior job. That's what you're talking about, right?
No, well, I'm talking about the
I'm talking about-
inclusionary units where we've income restricted it and then suddenly somebody's up against the wall of their income restriction. So, because
Oh, I
I
see
looked
what
through
you're
some
saying.
other cities
Okay.
and they have a thing, so if there's a unit that's like a moderate, I think they do this at Eucalyptus. If they have a moderate unit available, then they just switch the designations and you would then be in the moderate. But I think
That's
we
a
actually,
standard practice.
Right.
Yeah, but incentive to
Yeah,
do that.
but the other situation, I don't know how we address that, honestly.
No, I don't. I'm sorry, I mixed those
Yeah.
based on what Bart was saying, so I
Yeah, but the people whose housing it is because it's a benefit of being employed by the owner, I don't know.
Okay,
what- I don't know
so,
what
but
you
they're
do.
building their own housing, and then they have to build inclusionary for the community.
Right.
So why should they dictate that this inclusionary should be separate from their private business? So if I'm building,
Okay, so that was one last question. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I understand the issue.
If a developer's building inclusionary units, excuse me, if a developer is building a housing project with the intent that it's going to be employee housing, can the city require that the inclusionary units are open to the community at large
Yes.
and not
Yeah.
just
Elizabeth answered that,
employees?
yes.
I believe we can.
Yes.
Okay,
And we can do that.
the inclusionary units, okay.
I think that has to be.
I don't think the statute addresses it specifically, but the intent of the
The intent
statute is
seems to
to
be-
create affordable housing opportunities.
Right.
And so restricting that to an employee relationship, I don't think is consistent with the statute. So I would suggest that we would put that in the ordinance or the implementation guidelines, and I think we would be able to defend that.
okay, good.
Okay.
Oh, that's good news.
All right. I think that's it. Is there anything else?
I think the only last one I wanted to clarify is if we allow them to buy and rehabilitate comparable number of affordable units, that would be like purchasing eucalyptus gardens, or they're buying and rehabbing affordable units.
Taking them out of the inventory.
Right, so can we just say buy and rehab a comparable number of units? Because then they would, you're not necessarily creating new housing, you're just adding an affordability covenant. My second question, could they buy and rehab a comparable number of transient units?
I like that.
Could you take a unit out of the transient market and put it in the year-round market with an affordability covenant, and it satisfy your inclusionary requirements?
But the law still requires a replacement, right? That if they're demolishing existing affordable units, those have to be replaced.
Right, so if the property already carries an affordability covenant, then that's a
That's
different.
not gonna work.
That's a different
Okay.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So did you answer the first question? I agreed with the second one, but what was the first one?
The first one, it says buy and rehab a comparable number of affordable units, but there's already statutes in place about what you have to do when you demolish affordable units.
You're not increasing the housing by doing that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would be against that one before the second.
For that converting transient units
Yes.
would satisfy inclusionary.
So the Seaport Village Inn would be an example of that.
Seaport, right, or just
Yeah.
somebody's house who's
Right.
that's been in the transient market.
The intention is to increase the supply of the low mod stuff.
Right, of affordable housing. Okay.
Cool.
Good job, Elizabeth.
I think that's it. We'll be back.
Elizabeth and Amanda, that's great.
Thank you guys. No, Elizabeth put all this together. This is great.
And it did go, I was seeing
A lot of homework.
Pick up your wife and everything.
I think we have the same thing. I think we're going to talk about the same thing.
Mayor, Richard and I were both kind of talking when we, right before the meeting. We thought we were going to have a conversation on CUPs also.
Is that forthcoming?
At the last council meeting, or was it the one before? The issue of
remember.
conditional use permits came up, and it was my understanding that the council asked the planning commission to discuss them again, to have open that discussion back up about CUPs, seeing if there was something we could do as far as the
I think
entitlements
to have
going
another
forward.
meeting like this, I think to just discuss that. I think
I
that
would love
be
to
really
discuss the
productive.
CUPs and stuff.
Well,
I
then
think that would be really
let's see if we
I
can
would-
schedule one and we'll,
I'd love to do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
CUPs.
Is there anything else though? Well, because that might not
Well,
take 2 hours.
we did a lot
No,
of.
not today.
Well, we
Not
have,
today.
when we got information from the
back?
prior, we weren't satisfied with everything. We
Is
wanted
there
to talk
anything else
about
that's
it,
really-
to find out the theory behind it, and then we have a bunch.
And I think what would be helpful for that, Amanda, is if staff could gather what other cities are doing, because there's been a flurry of activity.
Right.
And with different kinds of approaches. I mean, we were kind of at the vanguard, and we should be proud of that, but there's always different ways of looking at things.
I would actually like, I don't know if it's something to discuss, but I would actually like to, I don't know how to go about it, but maybe that is, when new development comes, commercial development comes into town, that they're required in the code to build, to require 1 parking space per square footage, and that would eliminate the trailhead, all these
Right,
big
all these
developments
projects
that,
that-
you know, all the animosity and fighting going along with the city, because we have a parking problem, vehicle problem, and I think that would eliminate a lot of the discussions and mad people, because if, in most cities on the mainland, if you're building a 22,000 square foot property
It's a
over
formula.
town, it's a formula that's in the code already, that's built in, and that, it's not going to be up to our discretion
So
to establish.
super important
yes or
issues,
no.
but none
Yeah.
of them are on our agenda for today.
Yeah.
No,
No, we're talking
About an agenda for.
Yeah, we don't have that on
And
the
I think we
agenda.
also talked about, like,
There's no council comment listed on the agenda.
traffic and noise. Didn't we also, like, I was thinking that.
Yeah.
So we
Okay,
could
we'll talk
adjourn the
after, but
meeting,
the
and then
other thing is-
one of us could ask Amanda to pull together. We can't even have this discussion.
So there's no
This is-
council comment or anything on your
All
agenda
right,
for
is there
today,
any
because it's a special
comments?
meeting.
Any comments by public?
Nope.
Not on
Further
the
comments?
agenda.
Thank you all. This was awesome.
Good night,
And-
Tony.
thank you, Elizabeth.
See you next time.